Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a book that's always kind of fascinated me, and I know it's got a lot of you out there wondering too. The Book of Revelation.
Oh yeah, Revelation. It's definitely one of the more, shall we say, intense books in the Bible.
That's one way to put it, full of cryptic symbols, wild prophecies. It's kind of like a biblical puzzle box, you know?
Absolutely. And today we've got a guide to help us unlock some of those mysteries.
Exactly. We're diving into some excerpts from a book by Clarence Larkin. It's called The Book of Revelation.
Larkin's really interesting because he tries to provide a very specific Christian interpretation of Revelation.
Yeah, he's not messing around. He wants to lay out a framework, a roadmap for understanding how the whole book fits together.
Right, he takes a very structured approach.
So, like, one of the first things Larkin does is break Revelation down into these three sections. He calls them things which thou hast seen, things which are, and things which shall be hereafter.
He pulls those phrases straight from the book itself.
Which I think gives you a sense of how literally he's approaching this whole thing.
Absolutely. And that structure, that three-part breakdown, is really important to Larkin's whole argument.
How so?
Well, because it emphasizes this idea of a timeline, like a chronological unfolding of events. He sees Revelation as the step-by-step prophecy of what's to come.
So it's like a cosmic timetable.
Exactly. Starting with the visions John had in his own time and then moving toward, the ultimate end of the world as we know it.
Okay, so we've got our timeline. What's next on Larkin's roadmap?
Well, he spends quite a bit of time analyzing those messages to the 7 churches in Asia, those letters at the beginning of Revelation.
Yeah. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, all those.
Right. And here's where things get really interesting. Because Larkin connects those churches to actual historical periods in the Christian church.
Whoa. So he's not just talking about these specific churches in John's time. He's drawing parallels to the entire history of Christianity.
That's exactly what he's doing.
So give us an example. How does he match up those churches with different periods in history?
Well, take Pergamos, for instance.
Okay, Pergamos. What's the connection there?
He links Pergamos to the time of Emperor Constantine.
Constantine.
Yeah.
The one who made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire.
The very same. And you might think, hey, that's a good thing, right? Christianity becoming officially recognized.
Yeah, you'd think.
But Larkin actually saw that as a problem.
Really? Why?
He thought it was this dangerous mixing of church and state, like the church getting too cozy with political power.
So he's not a fan of church and state being all tangled up.
Not at all. In fact, he links that whole thing to the idea of spiritual fornication that's mentioned in the letter to Pergamos.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a pretty harsh judgment.
It is. And, when you think about how people have debated the role of religion and politics throughout history,
Okay, that's a hot topic.
it makes you wonder if Larkin was onto something with this interpretation. Like, is there a danger when religion gets too involved in worldly power?
That's a great question, and definitely something worth thinking about. Okay, so we've got Pergamos, which Larkin says represents this era of Constantine and the spiritual fornication of church and state.
Mhm.
What about some of the other churches? Any other intriguing interpretations?
Oh, there are plenty. But we've got to talk about Laodicea.
Laodicea. Okay, what about them?
Larkin really lets them have it. He compares Laodicea to lukewarm water.
Lukewarm water.
Yeah, that kind of water that makes you want to gag.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
He basically saw Laodicea as this spiritually bankrupt church, a church obsessed with material wealth and appearances, but totally lacking in genuine faith.
Oh, that's rough.
He even quotes Christ saying that he'd rather they were hot or cold because lukewarm faith is just useless.
So pretty scathing critique of Laodicea.
It is. And it makes you wonder if Larkin might be talking about some modern day churches too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Ones that maybe focus more on image than substance. Okay, so Larkin's got some pretty strong opinions about those churches and what they represent. But we've got to talk about those crazy symbols that Revelation is famous for. All those beasts, numbers, apocalyptic imagery. How does Larkin make sense of all that?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. One of the first major images in Revelation is this vision of the Son of Man.
Oh yeah, John sees the Son of Man in all his glory.
Right. And Larkin interprets this as a vision of Christ in his glorified state. Think ultimate power and authority.
Okay, so it's Christ, but superpowered Christ.
Essentially, yes. And Larkin points to details like the white hair representing Christ's eternal nature and that sharp two-edged sword coming out of his mouth.
Whoa, the sword. Yeah, that imagery always stuck with me.
Right. And Larkin saw it as a symbol of Christ's righteous judgment.
Okay, so the sword represents judgment. Got it.
And judgment is a huge theme in Revelation as a whole, right? The sense that
Hmm.
God is ultimately in control, and he's going to set things right in the end.
Makes sense. Okay, what about that seven-sealed book? You know, the one that only the Lamb was worthy to open. What's Larkin's take on that?
That's a fascinating one, because according to Larkin, that sealed book represents something pretty incredible. The title deed to Earth itself.
Wait, what? The title deed to the whole planet.
The whole planet. He's saying that through sin, through Adam's fall, humanity lost its claim to Earth.
Like we messed up and lost the deed to the place.
Exactly. We forfeited ownership, so to speak. But then Christ comes along.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
And through his sacrifice, he redeems that deed. He wins it back, paving the way for creation to be restored to its original glory.
So you're saying that Christ's sacrifice wasn't just about saving humanity, it was about reclaiming the entire planet. That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It really elevates the scale of redemption, doesn't it? But we can't talk about Revelation without mentioning the four horsemen. They're like the poster children for the apocalypse.
Oh, totally. Pestilence, war, famine, death. How does Larkin handle those harbingers of doom?
Well, he basically saw them as symbols of the chaos and suffering that's going to come upon the world.
So each horseman represents a specific type of suffering.
Yeah. War, famine, death. He even connects one of them to Hades being unleashed.
Okay, that's officially terrifying.
It is. But there's this one detail that always stuck with me from Larkin's interpretation. Remember how he talks about the olive trees and grapevines being spared from the destruction?
Yeah, that was interesting. Some people think that represents, like, the faithful being protected, right?
Yeah, that's one interpretation. But Larkin, remember, he's very practical in his approach.
So with his take.
He thinks those plants were spared because olive oil and wine were so valuable for medicinal purposes.
Oh. So even in the midst of apocalypse, there's still room for herbal remedies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Practical to the end. But let's talk about those two witnesses. They're kind of mysterious figures, right?
Yeah, they show up with the power to call down plagues. They prophesy. Who did Larkin think they were? Any guesses?
He was pretty sure those witnesses were none other than Moses and Elijah.
Moses and Elijah. Like from the Old Testament.
The very same.
Now that you mention it, it does make sense. Moses parted the Red Sea. Elijah called down fire from heaven. They'd definitely be qualified for an end times gig.
Right. And Larkin took their powers very literally. He thought those plagues they inflict in Revelation would mirror the ones from Exodus.
So we're talking locusts, hail, darkness, the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. He saw it as God punishing wickedness and calling people to repent.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the woman and the dragon? They seem pretty central to the story, too.
Absolutely. And Larkin's interpretation here is pretty traditional.
How so?
He sees the woman as representing Israel, God's chosen people,
Hmm.
and the dragon. Well, that's Satan.
Classic good versus evil. There's that scene where the woman is given eagle's wings to escape from the dragon.
Yeah.
That's always been a powerful image for me.
It is. And Larkin connects that image back to the book of Exodus.
How so?
Remember how God said he carried Israel out of Egypt on eagle's wings?
Oh,
Well, Larkin saw that as symbolizing God's continued protection of his people, even in the face of Satan.
okay, so that makes sense. But what about those other nightmare-inducing figures, the beast of the false prophet? Who did Larkin think they were?
Well, Larkin identifies the beast as the Antichrist.
The Antichrist.
Yeah, and he thinks this figure will arise from what was once the Roman Empire and the false prophet. He's basically the Antichrist's right-hand man, tricking people into worshiping the beast and turning them away from God.
And what about the mark of the beast? That always creeped me out as a kid.
Larkin had some interesting ideas about that, too.
What kind of ideas?
He thought it might represent some form of economic control in the future. Like, maybe you can only buy and sell if you have this mark.
Whoa. That's a chilling thought, especially in our increasingly digital world.
It is. So we've got all these characters, all these symbols, but how does Larkin fit it all together? How does he actually see the end times playing out?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
To understand that, we need to look at how Larkin interprets a prophecy from the book of Daniel, the 70th week.
The 70th week. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
Well, Larkin believed that this 70th week lines up with the events described in Revelation chapters 6 through 19.
So is this 70th week like a countdown to the apocalypse, like 7 years of tribulation before everything goes down.
That's essentially it. And Larkin interpreted it as this period of intense suffering and judgment, focusing on Israel's fate and culminating in the second coming of Christ.
So we're talking global upheaval, wars, plagues, the whole shebang.
Exactly. That's Larkin's take. And he believed this period would lead to the establishment of Christ's kingdom on earth. But before we get to that, we've got to unpack exactly how Larkin sees those 7 years of tribulation unfolding.
All right, let's do it. This is getting good.
All right, so we're back and ready to really get into the nitty-gritty of Larkin's apocalyptic timeline.
Yeah, let's dive into that 70th week you were talking about.
Right, that 7-year period of tribulation leading up to Christ's return.
It's like the ultimate countdown clock.
Yeah.
But 7 years is a long time. How does Larkin break it down?
He sees it in these distinct phases, each one marked by escalating judgments.
Escalating judgments.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds ominous.
It is, and it starts with the breaking of those 7 seals.
The 7 seals. Oh, yeah, those are bad news, right? Each seal unleashes some kind of terrible judgment on the world.
Exactly. Think of it like opening a Pandora's box of divine wrath.
Okay, I'm picturing this box with 7 seals, each one unleashing something worse than the last.
Right, and we already talked about the first 4 seals. Those are the ones that unleash war, famine, death.
Yeah, not exactly a party. But what about the other 3? What happens when those seals are broken?
Well, the 5th seal deals with the souls of those who have been persecuted for their faith. They cry out to God for justice.
It's like God is acknowledging their suffering, saying, I see you and your sacrifice will not be forgotten.
Exactly. And then we get to the 6th seal, and this is where things get really apocalyptic.
Okay, hit me with it. What does the 6th seal unleash?
Earthquakes that shake the entire world, the sun turning dark, the stars falling from the sky.
Whoa, it's like the whole universe is freaking out.
Pretty much. Larkin saw this as a sign that the day of the Lord is approaching the time of God's final judgment.
Okay, I'm officially getting chills.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens after the 6th seal? Does the 7th seal just unleash even more chaos?
Well, there's a little pause in the action, a kind of intermission before the final act.
An intermission, so things actually calm down for a bit.
In a way, yes. And during this break, Larkin points to 2 important events. First, there's the sealing of the 144,000.
Ah, yes, the mysterious 144,000. I always wondered about them. Who are these guys?
Larkin, being Larkin, took a very literal approach. He believed these are 12,000 people from each of the 12 tribes of Israel marked by God for protection during the tribulation.
So it's like a divine stamp of approval, a get-out-of-jail-free card for the apocalypse.
You could say that. And then we have this vision of a massive crowd from every nation standing before God's throne, clothed in white, praising the Lamb.
It's like this moment of hope amidst all the darkness. A reminder that God's plan of salvation extends to people from all walks of life.
Right. It's this beautiful contrast to the judgment and destruction we've been talking about. And then finally, the 7th seal is broken.
So what happens? What horror is unleashed this time?
Well, instead of another plague or disaster, it's the trumpets.
The trumpets. So we're moving from seals to trumpets now. This is getting complicated.
I know, right? But each trumpet blast brings another wave of judgment upon the earth.
It's like God saying, all right, I've sent some warnings, but you haven't listened, so now it's time to turn up the volume.
Ah, I like that analogy. And Larkin actually saw these trumpet judgments as mirroring the plagues that were unleashed upon Egypt in the book of Exodus.
So we're talking locusts, hail, darkness, all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah, the whole 9 yards. And Larkin interpreted these judgments very literally, emphasizing how severe they would be.
Okay, but you said there was another pause in the action, right? Like a halftime show before the final 3 trumpets sound.
You've got a good memory. Yes. And this time it starts with a vision of a mighty angel descending from heaven and proclaiming, "Time shall be no longer."
Whoa, time shall be no longer. What does that even mean?
Larkin interpreted this as a signal that God's patience has run out. The end times are about to unfold, and there's no more delaying the inevitable.
So the countdown clock is really ticking now.
You could say that. What else happens during this intermission? Well, John is given a little scroll to eat, which is kind of weird, right?
Yeah, not exactly my idea of a snack.
But Larkin sees this as symbolic of John taking in the prophetic word that he's supposed to proclaim to the world.
So even in the midst of all this judgment, there is still a message of hope and a call to share the good news of God's salvation.
It's a powerful reminder that God is still working in the world even when things seem bleak. And then to top it all off, the temple in heaven opens and the Ark of the Covenant is revealed.
Wait, the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah.
Like the one Indiana Jones was searching for.
The one and only. And for Larkin, its appearance in heaven signifies that God is about to act in a big way. He's stepping into human history to set things right.
Things are definitely escalating. What happens when the next trumpet sounds?
The fifth trumpet marks the beginning of the first woe, and with it comes a plague of locusts. But these aren't your average garden variety
Oh,
locusts.
no, tell me they're not giant radioactive locusts.
No, not radioactive, but Larkin does describe them as having scorpion-like tails, and their mission is to torment those who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads.
Ouch. So it's like a targeted attack specifically aimed at those who have rejected God.
That's how Larkin interprets it. And the torment is so bad that people will actually wish for death but won't be able to find it.
Okay, that's officially terrifying.
Yeah.
What about the sixth trumpet? What kind of woe does that unleash?
This one is pretty wild. We're talking about an army of 200 million horsemen being released from the Euphrates River.
200 million. That's like everyone in America on horseback.
Exactly. And they're not just regular horsemen either. They've got armor made of fire, their horses have heads like lions, and they have the power to kill a third of humanity with fire and brimstone that comes out of their mouths.
I think I need a new pair of pants hearing that. But before we get to the seventh trumpet and the third woe, there's another one of those interludes, right?
You're right. And this time, John is given a measuring rod and told to measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there.
Interesting. So even amidst all this chaos and destruction, God is still concerned with his people and his dwelling place.
Absolutely. And then we have those two witnesses. Remember Moses and Elijah? They're back.
Oh yeah, those guys. They show up again. I thought they were done with their end times gig.
Not quite. They're prophesying for 12,260 days, clothed in sackcloth, calling people to repentance.
But I bet not everyone is happy to hear their message, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
And they're actually opposed by the beast, the Antichrist, who eventually gains the power to kill them.
Whoa, hold on. They get killed. But I thought they were supposed to be invincible.
Well, their bodies lie in the street of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. But then something amazing happens. The spirit of life from God enters them, and they rise from the dead.
Talk about a plot twist. It's like a biblical zombie movie.
No. It's definitely dramatic. And as they ascend to heaven, a massive earthquake rocks Jerusalem, killing 7,000 people.
So even in their resurrection, there's still judgment being handed out. It's like this constant back and forth between God's mercy and his justice.
Exactly. And now we finally come to the sounding of the seventh trumpet, which unleashes the third woe. This one is different. Instead of another plague, it's a declaration of victory. Loud voices in heaven proclaim, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever."
Okay, so we've gone from plagues and locusts to a heavenly chorus announcing Christ's victory. What a change of pace.
It is. It's like this triumphant turning point in the narrative. And all of creation responds with thunder, lightning, and earthquake, and even more hail.
So I'm guessing this is where we're headed towards the final showdown, the Battle of Armageddon and all that.
You're getting ahead of me. We're entering the final phase of that 70th week, and things are about to get even wilder.
All right, bring it on.
All right, so we're in the home stretch now. The final phase of that 70th week. Buckle up. Things are about to get intense.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with those final visions.
Well, one of the most striking images in this last section is the woman clothed with the sun, described in Revelation chapter 12.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. And if I'm remembering correctly, you said before that she represents Israel, right? God's chosen people.
Exactly. And according to Larkin, this woman gives birth to a male child who is destined to rule all nations with an iron rod.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Lots of powerful imagery, tons of symbolism. I'm guessing this child represents Christ.
You got it. The Messiah. The one who will ultimately establish God's kingdom on earth. But as soon as this child is born, he's taken up to God and his throne.
So it's like he's whisked away to safety. But what about the woman? What happens to her?
She has to flee into the wilderness to escape the dragon, who of course represents Satan.
So even after being cast down from heaven, Satan is still causing trouble.
Oh, absolutely. He's furious. And he's determined to destroy the woman and her child. But she's protected by God, nourished in the wilderness for 12,260 days.
12,260 days. That's specific. Why that number?
There are a lot of specific time periods mentioned in Revelation, and, different interpreters have different ideas about what they represent. Larkin believed they were symbolic, pointing to a period of intense persecution and tribulation for the faithful.
Okay, so while the woman, representing Israel, is safe for now, what's Satan up to during all this?
Well, Larkin believed that Satan turns his attention to those who are left behind on earth, especially those who haven't accepted Christ. He works through his human agents, the Antichrist and the false prophet, to deceive and control the world.
Ah, yes. That unholy trinity. They always seem so powerful, so unstoppable.
They do wield a lot of power. Larkin describes them as masters of deception, leading people astray and establishing this global system of control.
And this is where the mark of the beast comes in, right? That symbol that people have to accept in order to buy or sell.
Exactly. Larkin saw this mark as a sign of allegiance to the Antichrist and his system, and those who refused to receive it, well, they face some pretty severe consequences.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? To imagine a world where your faith could literally determine whether you can survive.
It is, and it definitely raises some important questions about the role of faith in a world that seems increasingly hostile to religious belief.
Okay, so Satan is working through the Antichrist and the false prophet to control the world. But this can't be the end, right? Where does Christ fit back into all this?
This is where we get to the climax of the story, the second coming of Christ. And Larkin describes this event in vivid detail, really emphasizing Christ's power and glory. He returns as this conquering king, ready to judge the wicked and establish his kingdom.
So this is it, the Battle of Armageddon. That final showdown between good and evil we've all been waiting for.
That's right. Larkin envisions this massive battle where the armies of the Antichrist are finally defeated and Christ emerges victorious.
Wow, what a scene that must be. So after all this, what happens? Does Christ immediately establish his millennial kingdom?
That's exactly what Larkin believed. He saw it as the fulfillment of God's promises, a time of peace, righteousness, and justice on earth.
Okay, so it's like the ultimate happy ending to a very long and complicated story.
You could say that, but there's one final twist. Larkin believed that after the 1,000 years of the millennium are over, Satan is released from his prison for a short time.
Wait, seriously? Even after all that, even after Christ establishes his kingdom on earth, evil can still make a comeback.
That's what Larkin believed. He said Satan gathers a vast army for one last rebellion against God, but this rebellion is quickly crushed, and Satan is finally cast into the lake of fire for eternity.
Okay, so that's it. Evil is finally defeated, once and for all. What happens next?
Well, according to Larkin, this final judgment ushers in the creation of a new heavens and a new earth.
Wow. So it's like the ultimate reset button. God gets to start over and create a perfect world, free from sin and suffering.
Exactly. And in this new creation, there's no more pain, no more death, and God dwells among his people in perfect harmony.
It's a beautiful image. So there you have it, the grand finale of Larkin's interpretation of Revelation. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has, but even with all the dramatic imagery and, those intense descriptions of judgment and battles, I think the most important takeaway from Larkin's interpretation is this. God is in control. He has a plan for the world, and he will ultimately triumph over evil.
That's a great reminder, especially when things feel chaotic and uncertain in our own lives.
Yeah.
So for those listening out there who might be feeling overwhelmed by all this talk of apocalypse and tribulation, what would you say to them?
I'd say don't get lost in the details or the timelines. Remember that Revelation is ultimately a book about hope. It's about God's love for his creation and his promise to make all things new.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's a message that resonates even today, when we're faced with so much uncertainty and turmoil in the world.
Exactly. So as you continue to explore the book of Revelation, keep that message of hope in mind. Remember that God is sovereign, and he's working all things together for the good of those who love him.
Well said. It's been fascinating unpacking Larkin's interpretation with you. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep digging into Revelation for yourselves. It's a challenging book, but it's also a rewarding one, full of insights that can deepen your faith and give you hope for the future.
And if you're interested in learning more about Larkin's specific perspective, I definitely recommend checking out his full book, The Book of Revelation. It's full of charts, illustrations, and detailed explanations that can really bring these complex ideas to life.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Revelation. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.